For many people, faith and doubt, they're opposites of each other. And putting faith and doubt together sounds at best like an oxymoron, at worst a contradiction. For someone to say, I am a believer who doubts, or I am a doubter who believes, it sounds like somebody saying, I'm a Christian atheist, or I live in a rural city, or I only eat healthy fast food. Like, those don't seem to go together. And many people have bought into this idea that says, those who have faith, they don't have doubts. And those who come to faith, they do so after they have resolved all of their doubts. To some, doubt looks like this great enemy that's engaging in this guerrilla warfare against our beliefs. And to others, doubt looks like this sizable mountain that we must first climb and scale before belief can actually be possible. But what if I told you that both views of faith and doubt are actually wrong? What if I told you that faith that doesn't doubt is not alive, it's dead? What if I told you that the doubts that you have are actually based on a huge amount of faith? And what if I told you that faith and doubt, they're not opposites of each other, they're cousins? And what if I told you that you can both believe and have doubts? Would you believe me if I told you that? Well, we're beginning a brand new study dealing with doubt, faith and doubt. And I'm really excited about this study. And the reason I'm excited about this study is because doubt for me has been intimately woven into my own faith journey. And I can remember the first time I read through the gospel, the biographies of Jesus. I remember looking at all the miracles that Jesus performed, and I thought, yeah, right. I mean, nobody can walk on water, heal the blind, and everybody knows the dead don't rise. But I like Jesus. I like his love and his teachings on morality. And so in embarrassment, I would skim over the supernatural to get to the practical and the ethical teachings of Jesus. Now, I wish I could say that there came a point in my own life where I flipped this switch and I stopped wrestling with doubt about things in the Bible, but it took me some time. And even after I gave my life to Christ, it was this gradual process of wrestling with questions and seeking answers. And here's the thing about the Bible, and you know this as well as I do, there is a lot of bad teaching from Bible teachers on the Bible. And so it makes sense that people would have doubts when it comes to what the Bible has to say, because there's a lot of bad teaching that is just not true, right? But bad teaching is not the only thing that makes people doubt. Sometimes it's because we have strong emotions. Sometimes we doubt because, what the Bible says and what we are experiencing, they are totally different. And sometimes we doubt because, we don't even know what we actually believe or we don't believe. And still other times we wrestle with doubt because we just don't want some things to be true. And so what do you do when you have doubts? How do you deal with your doubts? That is the purpose of this series. Next week, we're going to talk more specifically about where doubts come from, why they come, and how we can address specific ones. And after that, we're going to talk about doubts people have about God, doubts people have about the Bible, doubts about that we have in the midst of suffering. And finally, we will wrap things up talking about doubts that people have about Jesus and what Christians have said throughout time about him. But today, I want to talk about the relationship between faith and doubt. Is faith and doubt somehow opposing each other? Is it bad to have doubts? Do you need to overcome your doubt before you can believe? And is it okay to be honest about the doubts that you have? When most Christians think of doubt, they see it as a sort of slippery slope that's going to turn you into an atheist. And many atheists, they look at doubt as a sort of defense to shield them from believing in anything at all. But let me give you a different way to think about doubt altogether. Because I firmly believe that doubt, when it is handled correctly, can actually develop a greater and more meaningful faith for us. And so picture with me a semi-truck. Semi-truck drivers, they drive all over the place. They deliver all kinds of goods to various stores and companies all across the country. And in spite of the fact that our grocery stores, they are stocked because of the dedication of truck drivers, there is story after story after story of semi-truck drivers who have wrecked, damaged, and even killed innocent lives. Okay, with that in mind, does that make driving a semi-truck bad? Does it mean that if you are a semi-truck driver that somehow you are an evil person who is destined to kill somebody? No, right? I mean, and you would be foolish if you judged all semi-truck drivers this way. Semi-trucks are like doubt. They're taking you somewhere. They're taking us somewhere. They're not carrying goods to load a grocery store. They are carrying all kinds of assumptions. And your doubts, like a semi-truck, they are taking your mind and your heart somewhere. Sometimes you have control of the assumptions, of the doubts that you have, but a lot of times you don't. And while you may not have control of your doubts or whether or not you like the things that are in your mind, you have control of what you do with your doubts. You have control of the steering wheel. You get to guide your doubts somewhere. You decide whether or not your doubts will become constructive for you or destructive for you. And what makes doubt harmful, what makes doubt destructive and so worrisome is not the doubts you wrestle with, but the unaddressed doubts you have. The doubts that you ignore, you hide, and you repress. Doubt has this gravitational pull. It pulls you away from the things that you hold near and dear to you. And if the only thing that you do with your doubts is ignore them and hide from them, then what you need to know is that you are shepherding your soul to that gravitational pull. And to push this truck driving analogy is just one step further. What is it that determines how fast you are driving? It's your circumstances you're facing. And for most of us, we're just kind of cruising by at this low speed, and so our doubts, they don't really appear worrisome, or we don't pay attention to them because we don't think they're a concern to us. But when you begin to add different circumstances onto your life, a job loss, an identity crisis, the death of a loved one, or even the challenges from somebody like a college professor, it's like somebody who's pressing on the gas pedal of this truck. And if you weren't in the process of guiding your doubts somewhere, you are almost guaranteed to derail yourself altogether. But it doesn't have to be like that. When we are honest with our doubts, when we are intentional to approach our doubts in a healthy way, it can lead to a stronger, richer, and more robust faith. Doubt can become the accelerator of faith. And what I want you to know is that while doubt can carry a lot of weight and travel at high speeds with lots at stake for us, you have control of where it's going to take you. And the worst thing that you can do is nothing. Os Guinness, he put it like this. He says, what is most damaging to Christianity is not that Christians doubt, but that there seems to be so little open discussion and understanding of doubt. Doubt, if you are intentional, can become the accelerator of faith. And so what even is doubt? I mean, does the Bible have anything to say on this topic of doubt? And what in the world do we do when we do have doubt? First, what is doubt? Doubt is simply this. It is simply the space between belief and unbelief. Doubt is not the same thing as unbelief, right? Unbelief is sin, but that's not the same thing as doubt. Os Guinness calls doubt the suspension between faith and unbelief. And in the New Testament, all the words that get translated as doubt have as one of their definitions double-mindedness. To doubt means to live in two minds. It is the space between faith and unbelief, between certainty and uncertainty. And when you come to think of it, that's not always a bad thing. I mean, given the fallen world that we live in, it makes sense why we would even have doubts to begin with. Doubt can be a really, really good thing. I mean, can it not? If you go to the store, right, for instance, and you go to buy meat that has not expired, but you go home and you open it up and it has this foul, awful stench, your doubt could save you of many trips to the bathroom. Or say somebody pulls up into your to a street by your house, and your kids are playing outside, and you just go inside just for a quick second. And these people, these strangers, they're nice and they're polite to your kids, and they offer them candy. Your kids' doubt could save their life. Doubt is not always a bad thing. And in the biblical narrative, the entrance of sin into the world, it has divided our world. And there is, in a sense, two worlds. The root essence of sin is simply to live by a different set of rules than the ones that God had made, to be our own judge of what is right and what is wrong. And when sin entered the world, it created this awful divide between everything in the cosmos. Our relationship with God, ourselves, others, and even our relationship with nature has been divided. And as a result, doubt was birthed. Doubt is most certainly a product of sin, but doubt is not a sin. Doubt feels the tension that things are not as they were meant to be. Something is wrong, something's out of alignment, and in many cases, doubt can be these guardrails that keep us from derailing. In fact, doubt can become the best friend of truth. It can keep people from believing things that are false, and it can propel people into searching out for truth. In fact, some of the most commended Christians in the book of Acts, they were those who had a healthy view of doubt. The Apostle Paul, he shows up to the city of Berea, and he starts telling everybody about Jesus. And these Jews, they don't just blindly believe everything that Paul says. Their doubts propel them to searching the scriptures to find out what is true. Their doubt accelerated their faith. And here's how Luke tells it in Acts chapter 17. Now the Berean Jews were of more noble character than those in Thessalonica. Why were they a more noble character than those in Thessalonica? Because some of the people outright rejected Paul's message without first researching it for themselves. For they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. As a result, many of them believed, as did also a number of prominent Greek women and many Greek men. What made these Jews of more noble character was that they were willing to let their doubts be handled in a healthy way. They were willing to search for truth. They acted on their doubts. What was the result? It was not skepticism. It was not a slide into atheism. It was not unbelief. It was a stronger faith. Why? Because doubt, if you are intentional, can become the accelerator of faith. And when we look throughout Scripture, we see some of the role models that we teach our kids to model their life of faith after were people who wrestled deeply with doubt. Abraham, for instance, he argued with God. Gideon, he tested God. Elijah, he wrestled with life and faith when he was threatened by Jezebel. Moses, he wrestled with trusting God to really use him. King David, he wrote tons of songs and poems about where God was and why God felt absent. Jeremiah doubted God because he was too young. And when we turn to the New Testament, we see John the Baptist. He just flat out asked Jesus, are you really the Messiah? And after he was put in prison, he really questioned whether or not this was true. Hey, a father with a sick son, he comes to Jesus asking Jesus not just for healing for his son, but help overcoming his beliefs. Peter, he abandons and later denies knowing Jesus. Thomas, he's classically called Doubting Thomas because he wanted tangible proof before he would believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Not to mention the fact that on the cross, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is by no means an exhaustive list from the Bible, but I hope you're seeing by now that our heroes in the faith, they were men and women who wrestled deeply with doubt. They had big questions. They faced real crises. And they wondered, God, where are you at? God, are you present? God, are you going to keep your promises? And do you know what God's response was to virtually all of them? This may shock you, okay? Because around most churches, most Christians, they will confess, God does not want us to doubt. He just wants us to believe. But when you look at God's response to those who wrestled with doubt, we find God responding with grace and proof. To John the Baptist, Jesus sent a message back to John with scriptural proof that he is fulfilling what the Messiah was sent to do. And then he tells all the people, he elevates John the Baptist's status, and he says, there has been no one greater born of men than John the Baptist. To doubting Thomas, Jesus shows up and he shows Thomas the marks of the crucifixion, and he challenges him to believe because of the proof, because of the evidence. And on one of the most remarkable lines in the Bible on doubt comes after Jesus rose from the dead. Matthew 28 says this, then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Who is it that doubted? It was the 11 disciples, later called the apostles. These are the ones who doubted. And the word to have doubt here, it conveys not resistance to believing, but hesitancy. It is living between the space between faith and unbelief. We don't get the details of who it was that doubted, other than the fact that even some of the very own apostles, they had a really hard time grasping the fact that somebody who was dead has come back to life. And guess what? Their doubt was not a barrier or a disqualifier in God's eyes, because Jesus went on to commission them to a disciple-making mission. And this might shock you as well. To both those who worship and doubted, Jesus says, go make disciples of all nations. The implication to me for why in the world would God have this one single line in the Bible seems to say it is okay to believe and follow Jesus while you are wrestling with doubt. Why? Because doubt can be the accelerator to faith. And if you will take those doubts of yours and you act on them, you do your own investigation, you will find, as many people have, that it has this way of accelerating your faith. It takes time, it takes intentional investigation, and it takes you to doubt your doubt. Just because you have doubts, right? It doesn't mean you need to believe all of them, right? We don't believe everything that we read on the internet, and same thing with the doubts we have. We shouldn't believe every thought, every doubt that crosses our mind. Instead of just rebuking, instead of correcting or scolding those who may be wrestling with the doubt, Jude instructs us to have this kind of response. Be merciful to those who doubt. So to recap, doubt is not the opposite of faith. It is the space between faith and unbelief. Doubt appears to have this gravitational pull, this pull toward unbelief, but it doesn't have to. And we know that by looking at the Bible, that for many of the heroes of the faith, they handled their doubts in healthy ways, and as a result, their faith was greatly accelerated. And so what should we do with our doubts? In Luke chapter 24, we get a powerful teaching on what we should do with our doubts. And God's desire is to walk with us through them. Luke chapter 24, it recounts two disciples journeying their way to Emmaus after a very discouraging experience in their life. They're leaving Jerusalem because, Jesus was crucified, and rumor had it Jesus was raised from the dead. The problem was they didn't see what happened, the proof. They didn't see that as enough to believe. And so they packed their bags and in all likelihood were heading home. And they're asking the question, are the reports true? Is there more evidence? And as they are walking, a traveler joins them. Who is it? It's Jesus. And here's how it goes. In verse 15. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. Keep that image in your mind, because God wanted to journey with them and help them through their doubts and wrestle with the evidence. This is God's heart for those who are journeying through doubt. He walks with us. And often our doubts have a way of keeping us from seeing God's presence and God's activity with us in the midst of doubt. But Jesus did 3 things for these 2 disciples that he wants to do for us. And he wants us to practice these as well. The first thing that we see is that Jesus shows up well aware of what these disciples are wrestling with and their emotional state. And he shows up and he asks one simple question. He says, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" And they responded by saying, "What, are you visiting Jerusalem? Have you not heard what has happened?" And so Jesus says, "What things?" And so they go on to explain that Jesus, who they thought was the Messiah, he was killed. And then the women, they went to the tomb. They claimed they had this vision from angels saying that he rose from the dead. But the problem is, the only evidence that they have is the empty tomb. They haven't seen Jesus. And so they're wrestling with whether or not they should believe what the women have reported. Or maybe they should believe another alternative, right? That Jesus' body was stolen or something like that. And here is what Jesus is doing with them when he asks this question. He is calling them to unmask their doubt. He is calling them to look at what they are choosing to trust. And when we encounter doubt, underneath of our doubt, there is this alternative belief that we are choosing to trust instead. This is so important for you to get. This is so important for us to understand, because when we are wrestling with doubt, we need to unmask our doubt. Unmask your doubt. Identify what those alternative beliefs are that you are choosing to put your faith and trust in. Some people doubt that God doesn't exist, and they say, the evidence proves that God doesn't exist. But as you begin to unmask that statement, you begin to find that conviction that people have is actually not based on evidence. It's not based on proof. It's actually faith. It's faith in a naturalistic philosophy. A worldview that says nothing exists except this material world. Therefore, it is impossible for anything supernatural to exist, i.e. God. But that is not proof. That's called faith. And so we need to unmask our doubt and see what those alternative beliefs are. And after they confess this alternative belief, right, dead men don't rise, Jesus, he then encourages them to examine their faith. All right, here's what he says in verse 25. He said to them, "How foolish you are." Keep in mind, this is his disciples. "And how slow to believe all that the prophets had spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Jesus calls them to examine what and where they were putting their faith and where they should have put their faith in instead. And Jesus provides proof. He does not call them to just blindly believe something. He examines the scriptures with them in the midst of their doubt. They were putting their faith in circumstances instead of trusting the promises of Scripture. And we should examine our faith. Examine your faith. What we need to do is to look at those alternative beliefs and ask ourselves, what are the reasons that I am believing that right now? How do I know that is even true? And what I would challenge the skeptics, like if you are listening to this and you are skeptical, I would challenge you to look at your skepticism, right? What fuels your skepticism toward God? What fuels it toward Jesus, the Bible? Once you begin to unmask that, you will find that there is this blind leap of faith into something. And many people, they haven't wrestled with those questions. They haven't wrestled with those alternatives. And I would challenge you to do that. And as you wrestle with them, I would challenge you to wrestle with the other side of the equation. Wrestle with the fact of, what if God exists? What if Jesus actually rose from the dead? I mean, what is that going to mean for you? What is that going to require of you? And the next thing that happens is that they invite Jesus over for dinner. And then Jesus, he breaks bread, and the text says that when that happened, their eyes were open and they recognized Jesus. That Jesus was the one who walked with them, talked with them, and ate with them. Their invitation to invite Jesus over for dinner was them choosing to feed their hope. And that is what we should do. You should feed your hope. We should feed our hope. On the road, as they walked with Jesus, their hearts were burning with hope that what Jesus was saying was true. And instead of tossing it out, they invited Jesus over. And we need to do the same thing. As Christians, this is why we have the church. Because we need people in our lives who have faith, who have hope, who can walk with us to keep our wicks burning when we feel discouraged, when we feel beaten down, and when we feel overwhelmed with doubt. And when we do that, we discover that we're not walking alone, that as we journey this path, there is somebody else who walks along with us. And not only that, but on the other side of us wrestling with this doubt, we find a richer, stronger, more robust faith than when we first started our journey. Why? It's because doubt can be the accelerator of our faith. That's why. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today online. Do me a favor really quick. If the message today was helpful or encouraging to you in any way, I want to ask that you just take a couple of moments out of your day to like this video and share this video with somebody else so that they can be encouraged. Also, if you go to our website, thechristianchurchoflitchfield.com, you will find right there on our homepage a bunch of resources for you and your family. Also, underneath that sermon, you will find a giving button so that you continue to give to the church. And I want to encourage you to keep giving to the church. There are many ways you can give. You can simply give by going to the church's PayPal account on the button. You can contact your bank, set up auto payments. You can mail in a check, or you can simply drop by the church office. We give because it is an act of worship. Jesus gave his life for us, and we model our life after his life by having the same giving lifestyle and giving attitude. And so if you call this church your home church and you believe that God is at work here, I want to encourage you to continue to give this week. Something else I'm doing every Wednesday at 10 a.m. is I am hopping on Facebook and doing a Facebook Live video. This week, I am doing something brand new, and I am so excited about it. This week, I'm going to be sharing with you an interview I am doing with somebody very special. And this Wednesday, my guest is going to be the president of College Press Publishing. That's right, our Christian church movement publishing house. Chris DeWell is joining me, and we are going to talk about prayer. You will be disappointed if you miss it, so don't miss it. Join us this Wednesday, 10 a.m. Next week, we're going to be diving into more details about doubt, why we have doubt, and how we can specifically deal with the different doubts we have. Do me a favor and invite somebody to tune in with us next Sunday. I'm looking forward to seeing you then. God bless.